Hello, welcome back to this series of discussions on Christine Korsgaard's 1992 article, Creating the Kingdom of Ends, Reciprocity and Responsibility in Personal Relations. So I want to pick up where we left off with part 2, Theoretical and Practical Conceptions of Responsibility on page 312. One of the things I really wanted to highlight from the previous section was the way in which our freedoms limit one another, right? If we're respecting the autonomy of the other, and especially amongst friends, and they're respecting ours, and we're reciprocating in this way, then our freedoms act as a mutual limit on one another. We restrain ourselves out of respect of that freedom, of their autonomy, when we're faced with it. So it's really important. She makes this point, I think, on page 309. Both what I choose and the way I choose it must reflect this constraint. What constraint? Another's right to choose becomes the limiting condition of my own. You must be free to choose whether you will contribute to the success of my project or not, and so on. So I just wanted to emphasize that point from the first section, because it becomes, I think it informs a lot of the reciprocity talk, that we have this mutual sort of limiting factor, right? So the second section introduces a theoretical and a practical conception of responsibility, and I am actually very partial. I'll just put some of my cards on the table that I'm very partial to this distinction. One reason why I like it is because I appreciate Korsgaard's shift to the attitudes that we hold about other people rather than beliefs. So under the theoretical conception of responsibility, we attribute responsibility to the person like a property that they possess, like a thing that we read into the character of a person, that they are responsible or that they have this responsibility. So we create like a theoretical object out of responsibility, to which then we attribute that to the person as if they possess it like a property or something. What Korsgaard wants to do is, and what she thinks is the most sort of philosophically responsible thing to do, is move our discussion away from the theoretical to the practical. And she says responsibility is construed practically by those who think that holding someone responsible is adopting an attitude towards her, or much better, placing yourself in a relationship. While of course facts about the agent and about her condition at the time of the action guide your decision whether to hold her responsible, they do not fully determine it. It's important to see that facts still do provide guidance for a practical conception, need not be envisioned as completely voluntaristic. So it's not just that we choose or that we are totally volunteering to hold this attitude. Nevertheless, it's important to see that in our personal relationships, holding someone responsible is an attitude that we adopt toward them, and it guides and forms our response to them in very, very particular ways. So she thinks that the kind of upshot, or what we gain by this philosophically, is that it opens up possibilities that would not make sense if responsibility were a fact about the person. It is because we both accept and avail ourselves of these possibilities that I claim that we implicitly understand attributions of responsibility practically in everyday life. For instance, it may be perfectly reasonable for me to hold someone responsible for an attitude or an action, while at the same time acknowledging that it is just as reasonable for someone else not to hold the same person responsible for this very same attitude or action. Perhaps it is reasonable for you to forgive or overlook our friend's distrustful behavior on the grounds that he has suffered so much heartbreak, but not for me. Not because I fail to appreciate how hurt he has been, but because I am the woman whose loving conduct is always met with distrust. So one of the things I think you can see is that when we shift this practical attitude, there's a much more robust sense of context and of the specificity. I think one of the problems with Kant's moral philosophy when it comes to application is always the high level of abstraction that Kant demands, and that his philosophy often reads on this very formal level. Now, when he's doing the sort of metaphysics stuff, I think that makes sense. But when we think about ethics as a practical philosophy, as Kant calls it, it's important that we actually be able to like navigate our personal relationships and everyday life with it, which we don't live in the abstract. That point is something that is really, really important in the next section that discusses Kant's two standpoints. Now, I've mentioned this before in other videos, but the two standpoints comes about because of the rift between the noumenal and the phenomenal. So again, just to review a little bit, the phenomenal is the world as it appears to me, through experience, filtered through my sense perception and the concepts that I apply to the world in order to make sense of it and to make it meaningful for me, that I understand the world as certain things, certain conditions and so on. Whereas the noumenal world is divorced from my experience. It's the world as it exists in itself, sort of independently. And remember, for Kant, epistemologically, I really do not have access to the thing in itself. If I had access to it, then it would become filtered through my experience because it would appear to me as a phenomenon. And so it would become transformed through my perceptual apparatus into a phenomenal object of my experience. So there's no way for me really to get at as it is in itself independently of my perception of it, because I'm stuck with my perception. So that's the two standpoints. I have to go ahead again. I'm sorry, I'm putting myself out there a lot in this particular video. I think that Korsgaard probably has the better interpretation of this distinction. Korsgaard identifies one interpretation of the phenomenal-noumenal divide as being ontological. She says, if behind the beings of this world there were another set of beings which have an active and controlling relation to the beings in this world, but which are inaccessible to us because of the limits of experience. According to this view, we occupy both worlds, and viewing ourselves from the two standpoints, we discover two different sets of laws which describe and explain our conduct of the two different worlds. So the ontological distinction is that there are two worlds, two sets of beings, one phenomenal being and then one noumenal being, and the noumenal is sort of like generating or causing the phenomenal beings, but they're ontologically distinct beings, one phenomenal being and one noumenal being that are connected across the divide somehow. Korsgaard does not think that that view is maintainable. She doesn't think that that is really supported by the broader work of Kant. What she takes to be the correct interpretation is that there's not two kinds of beings, but between beings of this world insofar as they are authentically active and at the same time beings as we, insofar as we are passively receptive to them. The gap in our knowledge exists not because of the limits of experience, but rather because of its essential nature. To experience something is in part to be passively receptive to it, and therefore we cannot have experiences of activity as such. So what she's basically saying is that the phenomenal world appears to us because things are acting on us, and we have to sort of passively accept what is given to us in experience, right? This is a big thing in German philosophy, what is given to us, and one of the basic reasons is a simple language one, that to say that there is something in German is skipped, so it's given. That's literally how they speak in German if you do a very strict for word translation. So there's a lot of this talk in German idealism particularly of what is given in experience, right? What we sort of passively receive from the world, just the world as it appears to us in the immediate perception of it. But we also are active agents, and our activity is part of the noumenal. The clearest place where I think Kant really talks about this, or rather, maybe it's not the clearest, but a very clear place where Kant talks about this is in the third section of the grounding. And Korsgaard uses this distinction to address Kant's solution to the problem of free will or determinism. So you have these two standpoints. On the one hand, as an intelligent being, we exist as noumenal, and that is the active part of us that has sort of causal efficacy in the world. On the other hand, we're also a being of the sensual world, in which deterministic laws do seem to hold between the things that we experience. So we have to live in two worlds, but the very structure of our being prohibits us, in fact, from direct access to that active side. Because again, in order to have the experience of it, we have to be acted on. So when we have an experience of some activity, the activity appears to us in the causal order of the sensual world. We don't have direct access to an experience of the active. Because again, the active can't appear as active. We can't see our own active capacity. Because again, as soon as that active capacity appears to us, we're now passive. So it looks like it's just part of the causal order when it appears to us. She talked about this a little bit at the beginning of this section, right? She says, complete causal determinism holds in the phenomenal or sensible world, the world of things as they appear to us. But we cannot know that it holds in the noumenal world, the world of things as they are in themselves. Indeed, since we must suppose that there are some undetermined first causes, or free agencies, which generate the appearances, we must suppose that things which exist in the noumenal world are free. Insofar as we regard ourselves as intelligences, the spontaneity of reason induces us to attribute a noumenal existence to ourselves. Insofar as we consider ourselves to be intelligent agents, then, we must regard ourselves as free, indeed, completely and transcendentally so. Yet at the same time, we must view our actions, like all phenomena, as fully determined. So again, when you take this understanding of our existence straddling both worlds, on the one hand as an agent that acts and has causal efficacy in the world, and then on the other hand as something in the sensible world that's subject to all of those causal laws and so on and so forth. So we have, insofar as we play those two roles, we have to maintain the distinction between them. They really cannot be reconciled with one another, or you can't see one from the perspective of the other. You have to adopt one perspective and look at it that way, or shift to the other one. But as soon as you try to look at our causal efficacy from the position of our activity, it stops looking like activity, and it starts to look like passive activity in the passive events in the causal order, right? So you can't view one from the other. You can only adapt this viewpoint or that one, and they're exclusive. You can't hold them sort of together. We have to move between them, and we have to logically hold them both, that I exist on both sides. But when I'm thinking about one side or the other, I can only think about that side. I can't just think about them both at the same time. Because again, they appear contradictory. They appear as if my activity from the intelligent noumenal side gets subsumed into the causal order on the sensible side. And my activity in the sensible side now appears noumenal under my intelligent freedom. Right? So it's a very sticky problem, but I really appreciate what I take to be the advance that Korsgaard has made in our understanding of this distinction. And I'm somewhat partial to her solution here, but you can be the judge of where you stand. So I think that that's actually a good bit for this particular video. I'm going to stop there. So just bear in mind that there's the distinction between the theoretical and the practical understanding of responsibility. Korsgaard's advocating for the practical one, in which we take an attitude toward a person. Now, part of that attitude hinges upon our understanding of people as both active agents that exist as intelligence on the noumenal side of this divide, and also as, you know, bodies that are part of the sensible causal order. And so one of the things that reciprocity is going to do in our personal relationships is it's going to allow people, and especially friends, it's a kind of friendship to be able to view someone as the end in themselves, who is active in the world and is doing things and is therefore then capable of being held responsible. Or better, for Korsgaard, capable of taking responsibility for their actions. And that's really important. But we can only appreciate that about another person if we're able to not just attribute responsibility to them like a fact, but be able to adopt a certain attitude toward them. Okay, so that's the end of this video, and we'll pick it up with the next section, the practical grounds for holding people responsible. Thanks.